Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell, and in this video I'm going to be talking about propositions 120 through 122 in Proclus's Elements of Theology. This video is part of a series, so I will link the playlist here. As I have been doing throughout the series, I am using the E.R. Dodds translation. For those of you who don't have the text, there is a link in the description box for a PDF version of the text. Okay, well now let's get into it. I mentioned at the end of my last video that propositions 120 through 122 focus on providence. And providence is indeed the theme of today's video. And it starts here with proposition 120. It reads, "Every God embraces in his substance the function of exercising providence towards the universe, and the primary providence resides in the gods." So providence is the function of the gods. And Proclus explains, "For all things else, being posterior to the gods, exercise providence in virtue of divine compresence." Compresence means that they're present with the divine. Things posterior to the gods are able to exercise providence in conjunction with the divine, whereas the gods do so by their very nature. For if the office distinctive of the providential character is the bestowal of good things upon the beings which are its objects. Let me pause here for a moment because Proclus just gave us a definition of providence. He tells us here that the office distinctive of the providential character is the bestowal of good things upon the beings which are its objects. So this is the definition of providence. This is what providence is. And he goes on to say that if this is what providence is, and if every God is an excellence, i.e., a goodness, then either the gods will communicate themselves to no recipient, and there will thus be nothing good in the secondary existences. Whence should they procure participation of things good, if not from the principles which have these characters primitively? Or, if they communicate anything, what they communicate is good, and in this way they will exercise providence towards all things. So Proclus is telling us that there are two possibilities here. Our two options are that either the gods communicate nothing, which would be a violation of the relationship that has been well established by now between monads and their series, or what the gods communicate must be goodness. He goes on to say, "Providence then resides primitively in the gods." In saying that goodness is primitively in the gods, of course implies that each Henad has its own series. Collectively, they are members of the series headed by the one as their monad, but then each is the monad of its own series. We saw back in proposition 116 that the members of a series are more particular than the monad of the series. So the gods are more particular than the one itself, which is the ultimate good that embraces all the gods. Each god, though, in turn, is the monad of its own particular series, and providence resides primitively in the gods. For indeed, he goes on to say, where should an activity prior to intelligence be found, if not in the principles above being? And providence, as its name pronoia shows, is an activity prior to intelligence. The Greek pronoia literally means before intellect. pro means before, and noia is the same root as nous, which means intellect. So providence is prior to intellect, to intelligible being. And remember, it is supra-existential. So he goes on to say, in virtue of their being then, and we're using the word being loosely, of course, with an understanding that the gods have a mode of being that is more exalted than being itself. So in virtue of their being then, and in virtue of being excellences, the gods exercise providence towards all things, filling all with a goodness which is prior to intelligence. So let's go on to Proposition 121. This one reads, all that is divine has a substance which is goodness, a potency which has the character of unity, and a mode of knowledge which is secret and incomprehensible to all secondary beings alike. So we are seeing the gods described in a triadic way. In regards to the intelligible and to the subsequent realms of reality, we have seen this triad of being, life, and intellect. We have also seen this triad presented as remaining, proceeding, and reverting. Now, Proclus was influenced by a number of spiritual traditions in his day. The Chaldean oracles seem to have been a particular influence on him, and they too recognize these triads. But they often use the terms father, potency, and act. So keeping this Chaldean structure in mind will actually be helpful in understanding the way that Proclus structured Proposition 121. So let's look again at the main proposition. All that is divine has a substance which is goodness. Substance here is not wrong, I think, but it can be misleading because that word is often used as a translation for the Greek word ousia. The Greek here, though, is hyparxis, and hyparxis means the fullest flowering of an entity. So we can roughly say that it is what the entity is, if we're using the word as loosely as we have been. So in our triangle diagram, hyparxis holds the top angle of the triangle. And by the way, all that is divine, this opening phrase of the proposition, it's broader than just the supra-existential gods. But I'll put that aside for now because for now we are talking just about the gods. So this first part of the sentence tells us that they have a hyparxis, which is goodness. In the poetical language of the Chaldeans, this hyparxis is called father. And next we see that they have a potency which has the character of unity. So potency is at the bottom right-hand corner of the triangle. It is the middle term of father, potency, act. And then he ends by writing that they have a mode of knowledge which is secret and incomprehensible to all secondary beings alike. So that is a very curious statement that we need to unpack. Whatever this is, it is the knowledge, the intellect of the triad. And we see from the Chaldean model that this is the activity of all that is divine. Okay, so let's see how Proclus unpacks this. Going into Proclus's explanation, it reads, for if it has the function of exercising providence towards the universe, which was Proposition 120, then it has a potency which dominates the objects of its providence, a potency past all resisting and without all circumscription, in virtue of which the gods have filled all things with themselves. All things are subjected to them, since every cause which originates and dominates other existences by superfluity of potency is naturally originative and diminutive. This then is describing the implications of Proposition 120. And he goes on to say, thus the primary potency resides in the gods, not dominant over a part only, but pre-embracing in itself the potencies of all existent things alike. It is not an existential potency, and still less a non-existential, but congruent with the substance of the gods. That is, it is supra-existential. And the word substance here again is hyparxis, the fullest flowering of any thing, any entity. So what he's telling us here is that he has put the primary potency in the gods. I just want to pause for a moment to remind you that back in the discussion of limit and infinity, Proclus called infinity the first potency, and you see that here in yellow. And now, of course, Proclus is telling us that the primary potency is in the gods. He's giving us a little bit of a mystery here, and you will have to decide, taking this into consideration, what relationship does Proposition 121 imply between infinity and the gods? And what would this imply about limit, since limit and infinity together make the dyad? Proclus does not address this directly here in the Elements, but I just wanted to point that out. This is a meaningful contemplation, and it's one that will potentially help you more clearly see the role of limit and infinity in this metaphysics as a whole. Coming back to Proposition 121, one thing Proclus does make clear is that he sees the gods as omnipotent. He says the primary potency resides in the gods. And then in the next paragraph, he tells us, again, the determinative principles of all forms of knowledge pre-subsist in the gods after the mode of unity. For all other forms of knowledge came into existence in virtue of the divine knowledge which transcends the sum of things. It is not intellective, and still less is it any of the modes of cognition posterior to intelligence, but it is enthroned above intelligence according to the distinctive character of Godhead. So the knowledge of the gods does not have to follow the logical discursive steps that our linear reasoning has to. It is a higher form of knowledge, some form of unitary knowledge. It's after the mode of unity. And I want to direct your attention now to the part I just put in yellow. All other forms of knowledge came into existence in virtue of the divine knowledge. So the gods are the source of knowledge. And this is the significance that I see in the word pronoia. The knowledge of the gods is prior to intellect, and the unfolding of this knowledge is what it means to be providential. Okay, now the last paragraph. It reads, thus, if there is a divine knowledge, this knowledge is secret and unitary. So he is telling us more about this activity that is the mode of knowledge. And he goes on to say, if it's a divine potency, it is without all circumscription, and it embraces all alike. Without circumscription means without limit. If it is a divine goodness, it defines the substance, the hyparxis, of the gods. For notwithstanding that they have all three attributes, knowledge, potency, and goodness, yet their substance, hyparxis, is characterized and their proper nature determined by that which is best, namely their goodness. And this phrase, proper nature, is the Greek hypostasis. And a hypostasis refers to the rank or level, you might say, in the metaphysical hierarchy. So in this last sentence, he's telling us that their goodness is what makes them supra-existential. And remember, their goodness also makes them a oneness. So even though Proclus is opening up this look at the gods by using this triadic structure, the gods still each and collectively have the character of unity. So I think it might be a good time to remind you that Proclus opened up this look at the gods with Proposition 113, which reads, "The whole number of the gods has the character of unity." And when we're thinking in triads, it's easy to forget this point. Now, Proposition 121 is very challenging. So if after looking it over on your own you still have questions, you're always welcome to email me. There is an email address in the description box. And always feel free to ask me any questions you have on this proposition or any other. Okay, now I will go on to Proposition 122. I like this one. I think it's fun. It's reminiscent of Proposition 98, which introduced us to the idea of being both immanent and transcendent. So let's take a moment to just quickly refresh our memories of this one. This one reads that every cause which is separate from its effects exists at once, everywhere, and nowhere. Now, being separate in this context means transcendent. The cause is separate from its effects, yet we see that such a cause is at once everywhere and nowhere. Nowhere in the sense of not being in the effects. That's simple enough to understand since the cause is transcendent. But we saw back in this proposition that the cause is also everywhere. Even though it is separate, it is also all through its effect. And so it is immanent as well. It is present in all that can participate it. So this one might be a good one to review on your own. But for now, I'm going to go on to Proposition 122, which also captures this idea of being both transcendent and immanent. Today, though, we're going to focus specifically on the gods. And Proposition 122 reads, "All that is divine both exercises providence towards secondary existences and transcends the beings for which it provides. Its providence involves no remission of its pure and unitary transcendence. Neither does its separate unity annul its providence." Notice that again the word separate is being used synonymously with transcendent. The phrase exercises providence, though, implies reaching down into the realms of reality. And yet at the same time, we see here that each god transcends the beings for which it provides. So let's take a look at how Proclus shows this. "For without declension from the unity which is their substance, the gods have filled all things with their power, and whatsoever is able to participate them enjoys such good things as it is capable of receiving according to the limitations of its own nature, while they radiate good to all existence in virtue of their very being, or rather, their priority to being." Okay, we've got two things going on here. On the one hand, the gods radiate goodness because of their very nature, and substance in that first sentence, the first line, again is hyparxis. But on the other hand, the recipients vary in power depending on their place, if you will, in the unfolding hierarchy. Therefore, their ability to participate varies accordingly. For being pure excellences, by their very being, they furnish to all things good without stint. They make no calculated apportionment, but the participants receive, according to their deserts, what the gods bestow according to their own substance or hyparxis. And this explains what I just described. And then he goes on to say, thus in exercising providence, they assume no relation to those for whom they provide, since it is in virtue of being what they are that they make all things good. And what acts in virtue of its being acts without relation, for relation is a qualification of its being, and therefore contrary to its nature. What does it mean to be without relation? Another way to put this is, the gods are neither close nor far from any of their participants. If they were immanent only, then they would have a place in the hierarchy, and so they would be close to some members of the series, but far from others. But because they are transcendent, they transcend this whole hierarchy that we're now visualizing. They're present to all equally. Those members more unified and so higher in the series, and those more differentiated and so lower in the series. They're present equally to all of them. So even though that they're present to all equally, not all can equally participate. Nor again does their separateness annul their providence, for it would at the same time annul, and this is a thing unlawful even to suggest, their substance, whose distinctive character is goodness. For it is the mark of goodness to bestow on all that can receive, and the highest is not that which has the form of goodness, but that which does good. If the latter character belongs to any being, it must belong to the gods prior to being. For the greater goodness cannot be a character of principles good by participation, and the lesser of those whose good is primal. Okay, so the principle that Proclus is describing here is often referred to as the law of providence. Some people interpret this bestowal of providence from the gods as mechanical and blind and even cold. But this is not so. I think better imagery is of goodness flowing naturally and without limit from the gods, much like sunlight flowing naturally from the sun, only providence, of course, is completely unlimited. It's that feeling of pure love that's often described in spiritual experiences. It is a goodness that radiates from their very being. And this seems like a good note to end the video on. So as always, I would love for you to share your thoughts with me about the book so far. And please hit the like button and subscribe if you don't already. And I do hope you will join me next time. Thank you very much.